Welcome everyone to MaleFuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about Adolescence, Episode 3. It is a... Welcome everyone to MaleFuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about Adolescence, Episode 3. Spoilers for the episode, as per usual. This is a Patreon-sponsored review, so thank you very much to Allison for picking the show. So, this one jumps ahead 7 months. That's what comes up, because the first couple came up with day 1, day 2, or day 3, or whatever it was. This one comes up saying 7 months. Jamie's at it's not even exactly a detention center, because he even complains at one point that he's at a place that's a little bit more psychiatric. I think they call it a training center at one point. I think that's like the official term they use for it. But he says at one point, "Why didn't you put me in a regular jail? I don't belong here." Now, of course, he's not the one we should be listening to for that assertion, but so he's in a center, and this episode is the most focused of the 3 by far. In terms of like the oneer of like doing all of it in one take, this is technically the easiest, at least from like a film production point of view, because it is basically one room and like a hallway or two. The start of the episode where we follow the therapist character go into a lift and then up to the next floor is the most complex part from like a location standpoint. That's not to say that it's not doing a lot of little smart things in the room with the conversation once we get going, because there's a lot of like, when to focus on the right character, the way it moves in and out, that kind of thing. There's a lot of smart stuff. I don't want to diminish any of that. I just mean compared to working with lots of locations that you're walking around, lots of extras like the last episode, and then there's even an aerial shot at the end of the last one. This doesn't have any of that. This is a bit more down to basics, where we're doing 12 angry men, but it's one therapist, one woman, and an angry boy. One angry boy. They should have called it the episode that. One angry boy. So this is going to be a tough one to talk about. I was thinking about this as I realized that we were going to spend the whole episode doing this, which was not a thing that I was upset to like think about or realize, because I love the challenge of doing an entire episode that is just one extended conversation, and the roller coaster ups and downs as you're trying to get to the meat of it and where things take a turn, all that kind of stuff. I think it's a really challenging idea for an episode from a writing perspective. It's definitely challenging from an acting perspective, but as the episode started, though, I didn't know it was going to do that. I thought it was going to just be this for the first scene, effectively, and then transition and walk somewhere else in the building. But it never does that. It never leaves the therapist, really. It sticks with her. She's effectively our main character for this episode, even though we've not seen her before, and I doubt we'll see her again after this one. We get her via just this one window in time to Jamie's life. And Jamie's the only character we have here that we've seen before or after, as far as I can tell. So she's here to determine, she's here to be a therapist, obviously, and be a psychologist. She's not the only psychologist that Jamie's seen as part of this process, but her main job here, at least from the sounds of it, is to determine basically if Jamie understands exactly what he's done, what he's been tried for, that he understands that he's been charged with certain things in the process and all that. And she's here to talk to him. She's seen him before. They reference previous conversations. This turns out to be the last time she's going to speak to him, which is obviously a big point at the end of the episode. But this is going to be a tough one to talk about because it is so focused and it is just one big conversation, effectively. There's a couple of breakpoints in there. But typically, the way I talk about a TV show, it's, there's like plot lines and there's like different scenes that I can break it up into. And I won't talk about every scene, but it makes it very easy to sort of say, hey, here's the important part that I really want to address, or here's this part that I really want to address. It's a lot harder when it's all effectively one continuous thing. So this is probably going to be a slightly different way I talk about this. I'm probably going to be jumping around a lot more as my mind kind of like gravitates towards certain things. I think the first thing I'll say up front is the acting here is phenomenal. It's 2 people. One, we have this actress, Erin Doherty, who plays the therapist. Her character does technically have a name. I think we see it on her badge at the start, but it really is not a factor in anything. And I also don't know how to pronounce it, so I'm not going to even try. But the actress is Erin Doherty, and she's very, very good. She has to carry like half this episode, right? The other half, of course, is Jamie, the young actor Owen Cooper, who's playing Jamie. And arguably, he's more impressive just because he is his age, right? The idea that this entire episode, this one long take, hinges on them hitting their performances at the right times and hitting on all the beats they want to hit on and the moments that are coming out of it. He was a big part of episode 1, of course, and he did really well in that episode. But he got a lot of breaks. He got a lot of times for the camera to follow someone else. And he does kind of get some little breaks here because the camera will stick with her when she goes to the vending machine or she goes to the security room to look at the camera for a bit. But it's still, very unfiltered in a lot of ways. It's very much a lot of continuous performance. And like I said, the conversation has a lot of ups and downs, and he has to do layers of a performance where he's going from acting kind of normal to acting kind of brattish to acting maybe a little unhinged, like the that darker side of him's perhaps coming out, which I guess gets me to like the next point I'll make is it's not that I really had any doubts, right? I think the evidence at the end of episode 1 kind of spoke for itself. But if I did have doubts, I would be convinced that he was guilty by the end of this episode. And it's not because we see more evidence, it's just because we spend so much time with him. We see him react to how he's asked, various questions about the victim, about his family, about his attitude towards women and sex. And honestly, the way he reacts to a lot of this stuff and the way he kind of like pivots and slingshots around had me convinced by the end that he is what he is. And I think it also convinces the therapist character by the end, which is why the ending hits the way it does. Again, I don't know if she had any doubts before she started these meetings. She might have seen the evidence and just knew for a fact that, yeah, it was him. That's not the point of this. But there's definitely kind of a better understanding of him from her perspective by the end. One that kind of scares her a little bit. And I think, as much as I'm praising his performance a bit more because he's so young, and it's actually really impressive, the nuance that's there and how believable he comes across as a kid. But he is a kid, but you know what I mean? Like how believable the performance is of a kid of this type and the way it goes through the various things and emotions. She arguably has the tougher job in some ways, where her like demeanor and her like reactions and what she's feeling and what's going through her head is intentionally not something we're supposed to really know, right? It's something that Jamie asks about a lot during the episode. He asks her opinion on things, asks what she thinks, and she'll constantly say things like, it's not about what I think, which is, makes sense. Of course, it's not about what she thinks. But she's constantly not letting him in, and she's not really letting the audience in. And the only really examples we get, other than the scenes where she's with Jamie and we maybe try and read her body language just like he is those few moments where she's away from him and she's catching her breath, or at the very end of the episode when she's left on her own, and we get to see the performance kind of tell us like how much of a struggle this has been and how sort of emotionally affecting this job is and can be. And it's all about sort of holding things in, and the irony, of course, is that Jamie's whole character is that he's holding in things. And that's kind of normal for certainly people at that age, but I think just people in general, especially when they don't want to reveal something about themselves. It kind of feels like, yeah, this therapist character probably has a whole bunch of things she doesn't want to reveal. At one point, she is point blank asked about her job by the security guard, who's like sort of letting her see the cameras, and she says she loves her job, and he says he hates his job. And I'm not convinced by the end of this episode if she does love her job. Now, to be fair, I think the exact phrase she uses is that I almost always love my job, or I usually love my job. And I imagine this is the day. This is the one of the days where she doesn't love her job very much. And I think the intense interactions with Jamie, at one point Jamie borderline gets threatening, which obviously is a lot to kind of go through, and she has to keep her composure. So there's a lot of the performances in there that's really fascinating to watch, and that's like one big thing to take away from the episode. The other big thing to take away from the episode is just how well they weave in a lot of the ideas and themes and little details that came up in the last episode. Like, at one point she brings out the Instagram post on a bit of paper and says, hey, Can you explain what these emojis mean? And that was something that was brought up in the last episode. So there's this kind of neat through line, despite the fact that none of the characters who appear in this episode appeared in the last episode. I'm not even sure if we'll see any of the characters we saw in the last episode again. I don't know who's going to be in the last episode. I expect we'll at least see Jamie, just because he's the focus of the show. Maybe we'll see his family again, because they've been kind of absent. We got a glimpse of his dad, of course, at the end of the last one. But I expect we'll maybe see them. But other than that, like, even I was convinced we'd see more of the two main police characters. But honestly, the episode 2 might have been their big episode, especially since they gave the main cop his, like, you know, kind of closure with his son at the end of the episode. That might be the end of the journey for him, in the same way that this therapist has the end of her journey here at the end of this episode. So yeah, as far as what they talk about, though, it's really interesting to watch it play out, and there's no way I'm going to hit on all of the conversation points or even get it remotely in the right order. But the key things for me is this idea that when she starts prodding at certain subjects, he gets, you know, because he's happy enough to see her at first. She's brought him a hot chocolate. He's getting on with her well enough. When she starts asking about his dad. And this even links back to some ideas from the first episode where it was like, hey, is the dad maybe a problem? Is he abusive? And nothing necessarily suggested that, but the question was raised. And she starts asking about, what do you think of your dad, and so on. And he doesn't want to answer. He says, why are you asking about my dad and my grandfather? Like, they've got nothing to do with this. Why are you asking about them? And he gets kind of closed off about it. And he gets frustrated with the therapy process and says, why don't you just ask the goddamn questions you actually want to ask? Like, why are you trying to make like we're just having a conversation? And she's like, well, the first question that I wanted to get to on my list was how you feel about masculinity, right? That may not have been the exact phrasing she used. And, you know, how do you feel about being a man? And he's like, oh, that's a weird question. How do I answer that? And she's like, well, that's why I don't ask it straight up. I ask questions about other men in your life and how you view them, and sort of try and like get the answer through all these other questions. It's not about tricking you. It's just about the raw question is actually quite tough to answer. For most people, not just like a 13-year-old, it's a hard thing for most people to sort of like grasp the weight of that question. What does it feel like to be this? So, you know, there's a sort of back and forth, but he definitely does keep resisting the idea of talking about his parents. And you're kind of, the dad specifically, and you're wondering, is there something there? Is he abusive? Is he this? And, you know, eventually he's like, yeah, like he gets angry, but he's never hit me. He's never hit mum. He's never done anything like that. If anything, I think he's funny when he's angry. He tells a story about his dad pulling down like, the shed outside and how he thought it was hilarious. But he keeps resisting and like having to be forced or pushed into talking about him. And it all comes down to one moment, I think. There's like one part of the conversation that stuck out to me a lot. And it's not like this big dramatic thing, which is why I think I really like this. Because I think, you know, a typical TV writing piece would be, oh, the dad hit him in the past, or maybe even did worse, right? If you want to go really dark with it. Or the dad's abusive to the mother, or something. Like there's some weird traumatic thing. But the thing that it turns out to be that he finally admits, like a negative thing that his dad kind of did, it's actually not this monstrous thing. Yeah, it's not nice, but you can kind of feel like it's just because the dad doesn't know how to react in the moment. You know, it's this idea that, like, perhaps you could argue his own masculinity makes it difficult for him to just say and do the right things. And this has had a knock-on effect because it's kind of passed down this idea to Jamie that he can't turn to his dad when there's something wrong or that he's got a problem. He can't ask a question about it because it's the impression he gets is that his dad would rather not address it. And what I'm talking about here is a story about how Jamie's not really into sports. He never was, which is oddly relatable for me, frankly. But he's not into sports. But his dad used to try and like take him to like a weekend thing, right, where he'd play in a game for kids. And, you know, his dad would be shouting advice and encouragement from the sidelines. But when he messed up, he did something wrong, he'd look over at his dad and his dad would just be like looking somewhere else. Almost like he didn't want to make eye contact, or maybe he even thought that Jamie would be embarrassed if he was looking. So he was doing it out of kindness almost. Maybe, you know, misinformed kindness. Maybe, you know, obviously the effect that it's having is a little bit different. And it's not like Jamie analyzes this necessarily, right? But obviously the therapist gears are going, right? And then my gears are going, but it kind of feels like this formative idea that he couldn't, this taught him that if he does something wrong, that maybe his father would rather not hear about it, or at the very least it's something his father doesn't feel comfortable addressing, as simple as that may sound. So it's not this big monstrous thing, it's just this little instinctual thing he did. I mean, Jamie says it was like he was ashamed of me, and it's like, well, I'm not so sure it was necessarily. Like, I mean, it might be that. I mean, he might be reading that correctly. It's hard to tell without seeing it ourselves and hearing his side of it. But regardless of why he did it, it doesn't feel like the most monstrous thing in the world, but it is something that's clearly had an impact on how he's thought about going to his father for advice or for help or something like that. It's kind of taught him to keep it to himself, bottle it up, you might say, and maybe it leads to, obviously, when it becomes too much, anger comes out. And the fact that the dad also gets angry, even though he never gets violent, as far as we can tell, maybe is a sign that this is something that's gotten worse with Jamie, that he also bottles things up, but it's worse, right? Because it's went unaddressed, it's become a worse thing than his dad ever had. So there's that element of it. There's also this element that he expects the therapist to say, oh, your dad wasn't ashamed of you, or I'm sure he wasn't ashamed of you. And he gets kind of annoyed that she doesn't offer that, kind of contradiction. It's like he expects her to say that because that's the thing you're supposed to say as an adult to make him feel better. It's like he has almost this, I don't know if entitlement's the right word, but this expectation that she's going to step in and try and make him feel better about stuff. But she never does. And she never tries to make him feel worse about stuff either. She is, as far as she tries, she is absolutely neutral and tries to guide him through the conversation, but it never feels like she's trying to judge or anything like that. It feels more like she's just trying to get an understanding of how he feels about all these things. And then there's a lot of conclusions that she might be drawing from certain answers, but at the very least, we, the audience, are certainly drawing conclusions from a lot of the things that he's saying. And of course, really where your mind goes is as it gets to talking about Katie and about girls and this idea that because she asks him a bunch of uncomfortable questions and he keeps saying things like, are you allowed to ask this? Are you allowed to ask about this? But she's asking about, if he's attracted to women, what type of women he's attracted to. You follow these women on Instagram. And he ends up admitting that he saw photos of a couple of the girls that are in his year topless. At first he lies about it and says that he saw them in person, they actually showed him this. And that there was some touchy feeling going on. He asked to describe how he touched the girl and how she touched him, but then admits afterwards that it was all a lie. There was a couple of lines that he had that did give me a slight chuckle, just because of the way he phrased them. One was when she asks if he was attracted to Katie, the victim, and he says that she wasn't his type, and then said she was flat, no offense, which gave me a little chuckle just because he has the audacity to say that. Not that she cares, she's being a professional. And then later on, when he's talking about asking her out, he says he put on his best tracksuit, and that really made me laugh. I put on my best tracksuit. I'm not supposed to be laughing. It's a very serious episode, but that little line is just some stupid thing a kid would say. But yeah, so they're talking about this, and it's was one of the, and when it turns out to just be photos that were shared around, and this is going back into what I was talking about last episode about how school today is very different because everyone's got smartphones, everyone's got these social media apps and all the rest of it. But it turns out to be these two photos that were being passed around of two different girls by this one guy who had gotten sent photos. And one of them was her, and she was being made fun of for being quote unquote flat. And being called a slut or whatever because she was in this photo and she'd sent the photo seemingly. And he says that he sort of saw this as an opportunity to go and be nice to her, that maybe now that everyone else doesn't seem to like her, maybe she would like him in this moment because he would show her some quote unquote kindness. And the therapist sort of rightly points out, so you thought that in her time of sadness, because she was feeling down about everyone else, that you might have a better chance right now. And he kind of, doesn't he basically admits to it kind of stubbornly, but yeah, effectively. And it turns out this all happened before all of the comments that she made on his posts, calling him an incel with the emojis. So it's in code, right? And he explains all that to her as well. But the therapist catches him out in a lie here because she says, "But I thought you weren't interested in her. I thought she wasn't your type." And he completely backtracks and says, "Oh, well, you know, she is flat, but like, I didn't mind." You know, and he kind of stumbles a little bit, and he does say repeatedly that he didn't kill her. You know, he just sort of says that randomly here or there, and it's not that random in the context of the conversation, but it's random in the sense that he's never asked that. You can sort of see what provokes it in him, so it's not random in that sense, but it's random in the way that he's never asked the question, "Did you do this?" She never even talks about that night, really. It's all just kind of about what his relationship was with her, you know, in general, on the run up to what these posts mean. You know, why do you have these accounts? It's because, oh, you want to like follow these models and stuff. Okay, that's not that weird. But why do you post stuff for yourself? And she points out that, yeah, a lot of people are liking these comments that she was making. And he claims that when he tried to ask her out, she said, "Oh, I'm not that desperate." So obviously this hurt him, and it's when it gets going into the meat of it, and she kind of starts prodding more and more about like how that made him feel, and you know how angry. Because I think by this point in the episode, he's already had at least one outburst where he's like thrown the coffee or the hot chocolate against the wall, and it's not long after this where he gets up and throws the chair away and gets like up in her face and does the little sort of quick flinch thing at her to see if she reacts. And it's very uncomfortable, and the camera kind of comes round, and the guy who's standing outside the door is kind of like, you know, poking his head in and kind of try to de-escalate the situation. And she like keeps her cool and like tries to calm him down and says that there's nothing going wrong. But as it plays out, the thing that got me was that he keeps sort of bringing it up again, where he's like, "Did you get scared? Did you think I was going to hit you or something? Were you scared of a 13-year-old? That's a bit sad, isn't it? It's a bit sad and embarrassing that you were scared of a 13-year-old. And he kind of like tries to play it off like he couldn't actually be a threat, even though he's already killed someone. He hasn't realized that he is a threat to other people, or that he is scary to other people, or he does realize that, and it's giving him a lot of anger. He doesn't like that other people feel that way about him, which obviously leads to the big ending of the episode, where as he's been dragged out the room, he is demanding an answer. Do you like me? Do you like me as a person? And she sort of obviously says, "Oh, I'm here in a professional capacity. That's not for me to say." But he's like, "No, tell me, do you like me as a person?" And she can't say it. She cannot say it. And he's dragged out the room, and we see him banging on the window outside, the frosted glass, and she's left in there, and the camera comes around to find her face, and she, you know, she's got a tear going down her face. This was an emotional conversation to get to, because the simple answer is that it was a no, right? It was almost assuredly a no. I think the way he keeps having these outbursts throughout the scene really makes you convinced and believe. Like not that you need to be convinced, right? But it's without a shadow of a doubt at the end of this episode that he absolutely did it. That there is this deep-seated rage in there. And so much of his conversation with this therapist is even sort of like going back to like his problems with Katie, in the sense that he keeps kind of looking for, like, you know, assurance. He keeps looking for, like, to be told that he's not that bad. That she, you know, he even starts saying, "Hey, you don't know what it's like to be bullied," and you know, because at one point she says, "Oh, do you think you're ugly?" And he says, "Yes, I am ugly. Like, you know, no one's interested in me. You don't know how that feels. You're pretty." And he kind of throws that in her face, and he keeps kind of, it's like he's looking for this acceptance from her, and it's something that he obviously kept feeling like he wasn't getting, and that's driven this anger in general up until the point where he killed Katie. And it's still here. Like, all of that, all those feelings, all those reasons that he eventually did that are still inside of him. They are not gone. And it's this refusal to accept it. And I think that sort of like comes back into the wider kind of subject that we're talking about here, is that we don't talk about this stuff enough, or we don't like to admit that there's a problem, that there's something wrong. In the same way that like society we like to ignore that there's a mental health crisis, for example, or that there is a problem with toxic masculinity, or there's a problem with whatever. Like, pick whatever one you want. This idea that it's not even just a society problem, it's a problem on a personal level as well, is like not being able to be self-reflective and see what you are. Now, admittedly, this is a 13-year-old, right? Obviously, the expectation that a 13-year-old should be that self-reflective and be so in tune with what they're feeling and understand it, so many adults can't accomplish that. So you understand why he's not doing that per se. But just that idea, going back to again, that his dad like made him feel like he couldn't go to him for help, and that led to just bottling things up in this unhealthy degree. And then you add in all the other factors, of course, which we're not really getting into that much. But we kind of like touched on it a little bit in the last episode, is the outside influence of other things. The idea of the bullying, all the incel talk, and all the stuff that's online that's feeding into all this. So much of this is very much about how this 13-year-old boy views women, but views his place in the world alongside them, and feeling like he is persecuted, and the anger that gives him, and him wanting to act out and feeling, because there's a whole part of the conversation where he says that he doesn't think he's good at anything, and she says like, well, you sure? You sure everyone feels that way? And he's like, yeah, everyone, like most people feel that way. Most people aren't good at anything. You're quite clever. My sister's clever. But like, I'm not good at anything. There's definitely this self-loathing element to it all. I feel like this is one of those types of stories and scripts that are so good that I almost feel like someone with an actual psychology degree would be a good addition to sit down and talk about how this is revealing things as it's going on. But what I can tell you from like a filmmaking perspective and like a storytelling perspective is that it's balanced very well, that you can sort of like get the vibe of where it's going, and she keeps trying to rein it in, and even he tries to rein it in when he's been told off, but it doesn't matter. It's still going to bubble to that point where he's dragged out the room yelling, and he swears at her, and he does, all sorts throughout the episode. And like, I genuinely wasn't sure if he was going to raise his hand and actually hit her. Now, I didn't think she was ever in like any serious trouble of like a bad injury or anything, because there are people in the building that were going to rush in right away. But I could have seen him hitting her. I could have seen that eventuality happening, and I genuinely wasn't sure. And it felt like so much is bottled up inside him that he is holding down and refusing to admit, and getting uncomfortable the second anyone starts like prodding at it. There's like a rage there that's like very complex, that will take a long time to unpack, if it ever is unpacked completely. Honestly, it's a very tragic episode in a lot of ways, because you have this woman who's trying to do her job, trying to understand the mental state of this boy, and being willing to talk about some uncomfortable things with him to sort of get him to open up about it. And it's one thing where he keeps saying as well that was another therapist who's came a few times, and it was a male therapist. We get that in the dialogue, and he keeps saying that stuff was easier, that this other therapist was much easier with them. Now, I think it's open to interpretation if this therapist is actually doing tougher questions because she's going from a different angle, and she's trying to get into a very specific side of things. Maybe the other therapist had a different goal in mind with what he was tasked to do, because they're both doing independent studies for the court or whatever. Or is it simply just worse or harder here with this therapist because it is a woman, and because Jamie inherently feels more uncomfortable with the things she's asking because it is a woman? I think given how he talks about that subject in general, I would be inclined to think it is more that than the former. That it is more about, he makes it weirdly personal with the way he keeps seeking like assurance from her and wanting to know that she doesn't hate him, because that's what he seems to be mostly obsessed about, and has been for a while, is this idea of the women in his life hating him. It's a really solid, good episode. It's got the highest rating on IMDb of the 4 episodes, and it doesn't surprise me, because it is kind of just a masterclass of just writing basically 2 characters, Obviously, there's like the security guard and the guy that comes in to like sort of keep the peace occasionally. And the security guard, I mentioned a couple of lines from him talking about, loving or hating the job. Um, but even that, it felt thematically relevant to me because he felt like he was being a little in her space. It's like he really wanted to make small talk with her. And I don't know if it's necessarily that he was trying to flirt per se. Like I think that might be a little like step, but it's more just that, oh, there's a pretty woman in the office today. I'm going to like get up in her business because it's the most interesting thing going on, or whatever. Maybe he was trying to flirt. I don't know, but it felt like he was kind of getting up in her space. He was trying to talk to her about her profession and sort of show an interest in it. And when she was just trying to like get her job done, and it kind of felt like it was just sort of making you aware of this idea of like she's here to do this job and analyze this boy's views towards women, but she's also kind of like dealing with, just how men in general are around her at any given point in time. And it's not that the security guard is like a monster or does anything particularly terrible or anything. It's just like this idea of this presence is there, and it just keeps making you think about the interactions between the two sexes, basically, as this is playing out. And because even this security guard, I guess the key thing that I'll say here to tie it into the main story is that he's kind of also looking for some like acceptance from her, because he sort of brings up that he's reading some psychology books that he got for like a present, and he's kind of talking about body language and reading it, and he's like, oh, I don't have to tell you that. He's looking for like a pat in the back and a smile, and her saying, yeah, that's quite right. Oh, you're getting this, or he's looking for something, and that in and of itself isn't inherently something that's always a bad thing necessarily, but in the context of this episode, because we're dealing with Jamie's desire to be accepted by the opposite sex, having this guard do it in kind of this sort of like minor like professional capacity, I'd say slightly inappropriate, other than the fact that it's not really that inappropriate, anything that he says or does. It's just this kind of idea that this seeking of acceptance is something that is still like present, even in like a relatively healthy adult. Although he does admit that he hates his job, so maybe he's not that happy. Maybe there's stuff bubbling up in there as well. But it feels like, yeah, it's only when she's completely on her own where she gets a moment to actually breathe. It feels like this guy's kind of hanging around her whenever she's at the security place. So no, I think there's a lot of really intricate stuff going on here in the performances and the way it goes through the subjects. And I think the fact that most of the subjects they bring up are stuff that we've brought up before. The initial interrogation at the end of episode 1, a lot of the investigation in the school in episode 2, a lot of the same details are coming up here, but we're getting to see Jamie react to them. And that was the other thing that stuck out to me as well in the performance, is that in episode 1, Jamie was kind of in this shell shock status because it was like right after it happened, and it was the trauma of the arrest and like the uncertainty, and he kind of came across as this quiet, scared kid, which also helped the surprise at the end that he's definitely guilty. But episode 3 here, it feels that we're getting to see the real him in a way that we didn't get to before, and it makes sense. It makes sense that he wasn't acting like he normally does in episode 1 because of what he was going through, right? The adrenaline of what happened the night before, the arrest and all that process, it makes sense that he was not acting like he does on a normal day. Here, in this therapy session, it feels like we're getting the real him. We're getting the ups and downs of him trying to act cool, of him being a little bit of a shit, to be honest, with the way he talks about certain things. And then, obviously, his attitude towards women, his anger coming out, all that stuff. Like, and he's refusing to admit it. Like, he never admits how he feels about women in, like, a broad sense, or that he gets angry about it. He just gets angry about it. So we kind of get it from the performance, and the psychologist gets it from the performance and, like, his reactions. But he never just says it, right? It's good. In fact, hell, he even tries to fall back on, like, a modern, like, crutch, right? Like, he straight up says, you can't trust the video, it's fake news. And that kind of made my heart sink a little bit, is the idea that this 13-year-old is trying to just obfuscate reality by saying fake news. Like, it's a catch-all term that just means, oh, like, it's not real. Like, it's not, even though there's ironclad evidence, it's not real because I've decided that I'm innocent. let's not get into where the term fake news comes from and like the people that kind of, got that over and used that phrase initially. But the idea that that's also now being used by a teenager in this particular situation is a throwaway term to just like alleviate himself from guilt rather than actually deal with what he's feeling and what he's done is a little bit gut wrenching. So it's kind of like it's like equally a character study episode, which is very riveting in that sense, but it's also kind of like a harsh examination of like all the things going on that can be used by youth and whatever today, right? Even to be fair, adults as well, but like specifically impressionable young people where they'll latch on to some of this stuff and maybe never let go of it because it's easier than admitting that there's something wrong or that they've got an anger inside them or that they've done something wrong and feel guilty about it. Because there is one point where she straight up says like, hey, do you know what death is? Like, do you understand that Katie's never coming back? Because at one point he says something like, oh, like, like that'll never happen again, and he's talking about the sending the topless photo to this other guy at the school, and she says no, she can't because she's dead, and it's like a really hard-hitting response from her, and he's like, I didn't mean it like that, I meant like, I meant none of the girls will trust him because he shared all these photos around, and he gets really defensive about it. But that leads to, do you understand what death is? Do you understand that she can never come back, that she can never grow from what she's done? And even if she was cruel, even if she was, as he puts it, a bitch, she'll never like understand that she was doing something wrong, that she can, she'll never be able to grow from it and become someone better. Yeah, and that's kind of where it leads up before he gets taken out, is that he keeps saying, hey, you can see it, you know she was a bully bitch, right? Admit it. He demands that assurance, that acceptance and corroboration from someone to agree with him. He's desperate for someone to say that, yeah, there's a lot of justification there. He also says at one point that he didn't kill her, right? He wanted to scare her, but he didn't. But, he should have. But he didn't, so that makes him better than most people, because most people would have killed her, but he didn't. That also felt like a serious kind of delusional like moment for him. Like that really felt like someone saying, hey, I'm one of the good guys because I wouldn't do this thing. It's kind of like someone who says they're a nice guy, like I'm one of the nice guys, and it almost always is a red flag if you actually say that out loud. Don't say you're a nice guy, just be the nice guy. But that's what that felt like to me. It felt like him like try to put himself on this pedestal of saying, hey, I'm kind of like, I'm good. I'm the one who's been prosecuted here for something that I didn't do. I'm kind of a hero in many ways, and I'm putting some like big words on this, but that's kind of that idea of trying to say, make it out like you're the one who is being mistreated, that you're the victim in this scenario, and it's a tactic that sadly works more than it should. And this does feel very desperate in this case, because it feels like, no, like they've got the evidence. He is probably going down for this. It's highly unlikely that he will not. But yeah, I think the final moments with her emotion on her own in that room before she leaves it sitting there empty, and we just see the empty chairs there, I think is a great moment to end on. Just how kind of traumatic this type of interaction is, and how scary it is that this boy thinks the way he does, and it's at this extreme level that there is an anger in there that's scary. And it kind of goes back to one of the lines from episode 1 as well, which is one of the characters saying that they hate juvenile cases, and this is maybe an example as to why. Now, admittedly, I don't know if this psychologist would be taking on an adult case. She's probably a specialist in children, I would assume, but I can't imagine. Well, it obviously wouldn't be pleasant talking to an adult who's done something. It's probably a little bit more disheartening talking to a child who has done something like this and getting into why they have this anger in them. So I really appreciated that, like, you can kind of see a seed of like why he is the way he is and the way his father is, but not in a way that his father is this like stereotypical monster necessarily. Maybe we'll find out more bad things about him next episode, but that felt like, to me, he's just a guy who doesn't know how to like communicate a certain thing, and it's come across in a certain way that is alienated his son, and it's maybe been at least a part of what's spiraled into this. But it's not something where it's like abuse or the idea that his dad's like almost become a killer and like the son's just like tipping over the line into or something. It's just maybe a good example of paying attention to the little things, because if you don't pay attention to the little things, then they might become big things. And that feels like a lesson we should all be somewhat aware of. But that is my thoughts on episode 3 of Adolescence. That was probably very rambly. I apologize. I did my best. It's very hard talking about an episode that is effectively one continuous scene, especially when the conversation that the scene is kind of doubles back on itself, where she'll go back and like go back to like a previous question after the conversation's moved on to try and like provoke him into answering again, and it makes it very hard to remember exactly the sequence of events. But yeah, not 12 angry men, one angry boy, and a scared psychologist. That's the episode. So let me know what you thought of this one in the comments below. I do think it's quite excellent. And one thing I did notice, actually, just from a technical side of things, there's some windows in this room, and I did notice the lighting go a little dimmer or brighter at a couple of different points, kind of like if there was clouds moving in front of the sun at certain points. And I think that's the sort of thing that tells you they were doing this in one take and they didn't have control over that, because typically you don't see that in movies and TV. The only time it gets darker or lighter is if the sun's like, going away or coming out or whatever, is when it's very specifically chosen, and it'll only happen the once. You won't see it moving like between two like levels during one scene. So that to me felt like, oh, that's genuine daylight changing outside the window. Obviously they've got a lot of lights in the room, so they're doing what they can. But it felt like which is funny, because I would have thought that they would have just like been on a set for this and had like big lights of their own outside the window so they could still control it, and you wouldn't know the difference because it would just be big bright light coming through the windows up top. But hey, regardless, that's my thoughts on Adolescence episode 3. Next month we'll be doing episode 4 and finishing it off. So thank you very much for joining. You can of course support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and get some bonuses for your trouble. Check out MailFuzz Movies, where all the movie podcasts live. And you can also support via YouTube membership or YouTube thanks if that's more your thing. Any support from any direction is greatly appreciated. Helps keep everything coming. Thank you very much. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?